Evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Dan Brooks, and I am Club Z's National Activism Officer. Wanted to welcome you all to Club Z's fourth Eye on Zion webinar. Tonight's webinar is The Legal War to Secure Jewish Students' Rights. Before we introduce our distinguished guest, I wanted to say that this webinar series would not be possible without the support of our generous donors. So if you would like to experience more of this type of programming, please consider supporting us at clubz.org. On to tonight's topic. As I'm sure we've all been following, the American campus has recently, and especially since October, become the new battleground in the war against Israel and her supporters. The Lawfare Project's Benjamin Ryberg is with us to discuss the lawsuits that they have brought against universities and the ongoing struggle to secure Jewish students' rights, as well as how, as we as a community, can help. A little bit about Benjamin. He is an attorney who serves as the COO and Director of Research at the Lawfare Project. His primary areas of focus include civil rights law, First Amendment law, and anti-terrorism law. Ben earned his BA from University of Michigan and his JD from Yeshiva University's Benjamin Cardozo School of Law. And before I hand it off to you, Ben, just wanted to let everyone know that if you do have questions, which we'll get to about half past, please post them in the Q&A box, and I will communicate them to Ben during our Q&A time. So with that said, Ben, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Dan, for the introduction. Thank you so much to Club Z for having me. It is truly an honor to be with you all. And I just mentioned to Dan, but I think it bears repeating, and no, I'm not paid to say this. You know, I have recently been speaking with more and more parents of K-12 students, which is, traditionally has not been an area where we've had much to do, where there has been serious systemic anti-Semitism. Not to say it never happens, but it has not been a large part of our work. And very unfortunately, since October 7th, that has changed. But the reason I bring this up is because when parents are talking to me about how they're concerned about, are their students educated enough on issues relating to Judaism, to Israel, to the conflict, to discuss these and to frankly defend their arguments if they want to when they go to college, and they're concerned that their students, or children, don't feel empowered. I have consistently told them that they should look up whether Club Z is in, whether they can join Club Z or somehow work with Club Z, because in my experience, Club Z does the most phenomenal job of equipping its student members for the future, college and beyond. So truly my hat's off to Club Z, and I just want to, I hope everybody knows who is a participant in Club Z, how lucky you are to be involved with this organization. Masha, you do amazing work, and your team, so here's to you. Again, not paid to say any of this. Jumping in, the intro basically covers me, although if anybody has more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Very briefly, before we get into the substance, I'll tell you what the Lawfare Project is. So we are a nonprofit organization that functions like a public interest law firm. It means we give free legal services to combat anti-Semitism, free legal services to enforce the civil rights of the Jewish community. So what does that mean? Well, I'll explain this in the context of campus work because that's what's most relevant here. But basically, we look at the most pressing, urgent threats that the Jewish community is facing. We find situations come to us that we analyze and determine do implicate laws. In other words, that means we can address the situation by, if necessary, filing a lawsuit. The first step is often writing a very strongly worded lawyer's letter to whoever is engaging in the bad conduct and saying, if you don't pull it together, we will sue you, and we have very strong claims on which to sue you. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But the point is, we're really, we exist to ensure that Jewish individuals, they can go about their lives without having their civil rights violated, without being discriminated against because of their Jewish identity. And within that, I would also include Zionist identity. And I mean, in my view, that's part and parcel with Judaism. Maybe that's my opinion. And also I would say that a number of our cases also involve anti-Semitism in the form of both anti-Semitism, but anti-Israeli discrimination as well. So we deal with a number of different areas, not just campus work, employment discrimination, commercial discrimination, otherwise known as BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Campaign. As was mentioned, some issues involving anti-terrorism, issues involving hate crimes committed against Jewish individuals. For any of you who don't know, a hate crime means a crime, whether it's assault, whether it's something more egregious, whether it's vandalism, whatever it may be. But when a crime is committed based on the victim's actual or perceived identity, so based on their Judaism for our purposes. So let's jump into the meat and why I think you're all here. Campus work. We have addressed situations involving anti-Semitism on campus for years. We had a particularly groundbreaking lawsuit that was settled in 2019, in which Masha was one of our plaintiffs. And I'm not going to go into great depth about that because it is a few years old, although it's still very relevant. I'm happy to answer questions about it later if people are interested. But what I am going to say about that lawsuit, because I think this will give you a good sense of what a lawsuit can accomplish, is this is a campus that had just 30-something years of horrible anti-Semitism. This continued to build. The administration was, at best, not doing anything to address it. At worst, actually fomenting the anti-Semitism. Jewish students were afraid to walk around on campuses, displaying in any way that they are Jewish. And there were several major events, very problematic events, that actually formed the basis of the lawsuit and therefore the basis of our ability to confront the overall situation. So, lengthy process, jump ahead. Again, why is a lawsuit so important? What can this accomplish? We reached a settlement with the university, San Francisco State, and in fact, with the entire California State University system. Through this settlement, which basically means the lawsuit is resolved, it means that a jury or the court, the judge has not decided the case. It means the parties agree to whatever it is. You give us X, we'll drop the lawsuit. But it has the same effect as if a jury decided it. What we agreed to included, for example, throughout the California State University system, that Zionism was to be recognized, is understood to be a core component or an important component of the identity of many Jews. Whether it's most Jews, whether it's all Jews, at least many Jews. And therefore, anti-Zionist discrimination is now recognized officially as prohibited anti-Jewish discrimination. As you might guess, schools, businesses, you cannot discriminate against somebody because they are Asian or Black or Jewish or Hindu or what have you, members of the LGBTQ community, parents, all these different classes. You cannot discriminate against somebody based on who they are. One thing you can discriminate against people on, though, is based on their political leanings or political views. That is not protected. So if I want to say, my student organization is for Democrats only or Republicans only, I can do that. And nobody can, there may be ways the university can stop me, but it is not illegal what I'm doing. Someone cannot sue me for doing that or sue the university for not stopping me from doing that. Why is this relevant? Because over the years, we've seen more and more efforts by groups like SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, and others to couch what is very clearly anti-Jewish, discrimination as anti-Zionist discrimination, and to take the line that Zionism is not religious. It's not part of Jewish ethnic, cultural, religious identity. Zionism is political. Zionism is you support Bibi Netanyahu, you support certain Israeli policies, you are anti-Palestinian, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's a bogus, I could use a more colorful word, but it's a nonsense definition. And I mean, I'll leave it at that. The point is, this tactic has been used to exclude Jewish individuals, to discriminate against Jewish individuals without actually, technically discriminating against them because they're Jewish. If I say you can't come in here because you're Zionist, and that's political, I think maybe I can get away with that versus overtly saying no Jews allowed here. So this is exactly what was going on San Francisco State's campus. And that's why this component of the settlement agreement was so important. Because now anytime anybody tries to pull that, and this policy endures to this day, and if California state system, including San Francisco State, do not uphold this policy, we will drag them back into court and sue for violation of the settlement agreement, which is quite simple. And we will compel them to uphold their policy. This protects Jewish students, well, at the time, who were involved in this lawsuit and experiencing what was happening on campus then, Jewish professors, then and now and into the future. This is an enduring policy. There were a bunch of other provisions of that settlement, including creating a new position, a full-time Jewish student life coordinator, to be there to look out for the rights of Jewish students, to help them if they are experiencing discrimination. The school had to create that, fill that position, hire somebody, and pay for it, and a bunch of other things. So again, yes, this is a few years old, but I bring this up because it really shows the power that a lawsuit can have. It's not just about, okay, maybe we'll get some money for somebody. That can happen too. It's about affecting meaningful and broad-based change, not only at San Francisco State here and the rest of the CSU system, but something like this gets covered by the press. We got a tremendous amount of public and media attention on this, which on purpose. This sends a message to other schools that if you behave similarly, if you allow conduct like this, whether it's the anti-Zionist or anti-Jewish discrimination masquerading as anti-Zionist discrimination, whether it's something else, whatever forms of unlawful anti-Semitism, we are here. We are going to come after you. We are going to win. And it's going to be, it would be in your best interest to avoid all that, to do the right thing and to protect your Jewish student populations from the get-go. So anyway, I will leave that there and talk about some of our more current lawsuits. I just want to mention first, given the time, I'm not going to go into tremendous depth about the most relevant laws that apply and protect Jewish students on campus. If that's something anybody's interested in, you can ask me in the Q&A, you can ask me about it later, or if you're just not interested, that's fine too. But I want to reserve that for if there is time. So, as many of you may know, the situation at colleges is not great, to say the least, since October 7th. Now, I do want to clarify, and this is based on my experience, but my experience is talking to hundreds and hundreds of students who have contacted us since October 7th, parents, professors. Now, at this point, I'm telling you this because I do think what I am seeing on campuses is legit. This is not sort of an anecdotal, I heard of one thing here and I'm going to draw a big conclusion. I mean, I'm seeing what's happening everywhere. The situation has gotten bad at a lot of campuses for Jewish students. I will caveat that though by saying, I hear a lot of people, a lot of students who are saying we're afraid for our physical well-being. And listen, I'm not here to tell anybody how to feel. What I will say though is overwhelmingly, we are not seeing much of any physical violence on campus or threats of violence. It has happened. There are instances where someone shoves somebody else or punches somebody, or there's a threat of, I'm going to come get you, Jew, or something worse than that. We're not seeing a lot of this. And I think it's really important to keep in mind, to look at when, all of you go off, or those who do go off to college, I'm sure these concerns will still be there, but to not get caught up in sort of community worries, which I think are very valid, but to look at what's actually going on a particular campus, and to realize that if people are holding rallies and saying disgusting things, we may not like that. That may be incredibly offensive. It may cross the line into illegal territory. Other things may be going on, actual acts of discrimination where we as Jewish students are being precluded from accessing things at the university, whether it's classes, whether it's joining a club or starting a club, whether it's putting up posters, any number of things. We may be being denied those rights by the university, which is when it can be time for a lawsuit. But this doesn't necessarily mean that there is reason to be fearful for one's safety. Obviously, be vigilant. If something is happening, yes, be on top of things. If anybody is threatened with violence or the victim of violence, you immediately call the police. You don't start calling a lawyer or going to whoever at the university. You safety first. So I want to make sure my message is not suggesting that this be taken lightly, but I do want people to, when you go to college, if the situation is similar to how it is now, to get a sense of what your school is like, and to not go in terrified that someone is waiting to come, do something violent towards you. Because again, overwhelming majority, that's fortunately not what's happening. However, that's not to say there's not a lot of really bad stuff happening. A lot of what people hear about and what sort of gets the most attention, and I alluded to this before, is there's a ton of anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist, I'll use those terms interchangeably for these purposes, that kind of rhetoric on campus. And that's awful. No Jewish students should have to walk around and hear these terrible things, from the river to the sea. That is a genocidal call. By resistance by any means necessary. And anybody can claim that means something else, but that is justification of what Hamas did. We have seen statements that are even more overtly in support of Hamas, and that actually can get into the unlawful area. So I don't think anybody should have to deal with this. That being said, a lot of that, if it's just, say, SJP holds a rally and nobody's being violent, they're chanting from the river to the sea, they're not chanting it at individual Jewish students or following you around or blocking you from accessing a certain path on campus. Generally speaking, and at least at public schools and private schools as well in California, these groups can do that, and the administration really cannot do too much to stop them. This is protected speech by and large. However, these do not tend to be the main problems on campus. What we see and where legal action can come in, again, is where campuses, either administrators, faculty, or students, but enabled by university personnel, are actually denying Jewish students from the same rights, the same opportunities that are available to all others. This can be as simple as, all student organizations have the right to set up tables in a certain area if they register properly and what have you. And that the school cannot, prohibit them because, we're not pro-Israel or whatever else. It doesn't matter what the content is. If it's a student group and they have a right, and all student groups have a specified right according to school policies, then the school can't just arbitrarily step in and say no. But we have seen many instances where schools, for one reason or another, have told Jewish student groups, no, you can't do a table. We think it'll lead to some kind of melee or whatever else. They can't do that. If it's very similar to if there is this is a more obvious example, if there's a computer lab on campus and any students can access it, then certainly campus and faculty and administrators cannot say Jewish students can't come in here. But also, if SJP or other groups like that decide to gather out in front and form a human chain to block students, Jewish or otherwise, from entering, this needs to first immediately be reported. I'll get back to that. And then if the university doesn't do something meaningful about it, which in this case means quickly dispersing the crowd, dispersing the human chain, ensuring that Jewish students can access this facility that they have a right to access, that they pay significant tuition to access. If that doesn't happen, the university is very, very possibly in violation of its legal rights, and that's where a lawsuit comes in. Similarly, if people are being treated differently, like if a lot of students, both Palestinian and Jewish, had a lot of difficulty just emotionally after what happened on October 7th. And many students were requesting from their schools accommodations like, I'd like to take, there's a lot of uproar and anxiety and protests on campus. I would feel much safer and more comfortable if I could participate in classes remotely for a bit, which these schools all have capacity to do. And there have been situations where we've found out that an Arabic student was told, "Sure, you can do this," and then later on, a Jewish student was denied from doing this. That's outward discrimination. School is giving an opportunity, whether it's from a written policy or not. They've made a decision in saying that students who are experiencing XYZ because of what's going on, that we will allow them to participate remotely. You cannot say that this is only available to one group of students and not to another group of students. So time flies. We're almost at the half-hour mark. I'll just say very quickly, we can talk about this more as well. So since October 7th, we have filed 2 lawsuits against colleges in the US, one against a college in Canada. We are preparing several others. The first 2 we filed, the first was against Carnegie Mellon University. And basically, it's for those of you who don't know it, because apparently a lot of people aren't familiar with it. It's a very elite school. It's also one of the top recipients of Qatari funding, which is a whole other potential issue. But basically, we were seeing reports about a number of issues going on at the school, general unrest facing Jewish students. And then we were connected or reached out to by an individual student, a Jewish student. And she'd been having issues at the school for quite a while. This started after the Tree of Life synagogue massacre several years ago. She was from the area, and she had requested what should have been an excused absence to attend a memorial service, and she was denied. And the school didn't give her any good reason for why she couldn't be there. And frankly, there was no good reason. The school had no right to deny her this to miss class and attend this. So this was a number of years ago, though. But that's when this started. She had faced many other very troubling incidents between then and when she got to us. But ultimately, she got to us because she's an architecture student, and in one of her classes, as part of a project, she created a model that had to do with the Orthodox Jewish community, specifically how the Orthodox community can turn a public space into a private space for religious purposes. And so she creates this model, and her instructor came up to her and told her, I kid you not, I quote this, that it would have been better if she'd done her project on what Jewish people do to make themselves so hated. I mean, imagine it truly, things like this are still unfathomable to me, because I didn't see this when I was in college. And even with a lot of the really terrible things on campus that I see, when statements like this are coming from professors, which unfortunately they more and more seem to be, it's, for me, it really shocks the conscience. So the students immediately went out and did exactly what one should do in this situation, and filed a complaint with the relevant office. Often this is called a DEI, or an anti-discrimination or a non-discrimination office, or a Title IX office, even though the key law is Title VI. But keep Title IX, DEI, non-discrimination, keep those words in mind, because anytime any student faces anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic discrimination, more often than not, the first thing to do is to file a complaint within the school. This is because if you later want to pursue any legal action, it's basically required that you at least tried to have the school resolve the issue and go through the school's processes before a court and a judge will intervene. So this was the right thing to do. The student went in, and they said, like the professor said this to me, there's also been these other instances. I'm very uncomfortable in class. I'm concerned about my grade, et cetera, et cetera. And when she did this, the school ultimately took a number of steps to retaliate against her for making this complaint. Retaliation for filing an anti-discrimination complaint is itself actionable. By actionable, I mean that illegal. That is the basis of a lawsuit. And they took a number of steps to exclude the student from the program, and ultimately gave her an objectively undeserved near failing grade, and a bunch of other issues. So when she came to us, this is the type of situation we saw. Okay, looking at all the facts, because any analysis of what actually is a good lawsuit is very, very totally dependent on the specific facts. We looked at this and said, after many hours of thinking, of considering, said, okay, we've identified all of these different laws that we think are violated, have been violated by the school in failing to protect your rights. And in fact, in taking harmful retaliatory steps against you when you simply reported that you were uncomfortable and sought help to enforce your own rights. So that lawsuit is ongoing. Very quickly, I do know it's 8:30. I'll skip the Canada case for now, but the case yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say, feel free to speak for another 5 to 10, because I think that we do want to hear more of these details. So, and then we could open up.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So, and well, I'll go back, and what I'll say about that case is, just so you have a sense, I will spare you the legal nitty gritty, but what kind of lawsuits does this pave the way for? Or what kind of claims in a lawsuit? A lawsuit, for those who are not familiar, and I don't expect many of you necessarily are, but basically, to start a lawsuit, you file what's called a complaint. You put in, what are the facts? Who are the people involved? A few other things that are less interesting, and I will skip right now. But here's the problem that's going on. Here are the specific facts that show what the person or university or whomever were suing, what they did wrong. This is followed by a section called causes of action. And I hope this is not boring anybody. I do think it's worth knowing at least a little bit about. The causes of action is the specific laws. It can be statutes. It can be parts of the Constitution, the First Amendment, let's say, protecting free speech. It can be something like breach of contract, which is not necessarily a law, but is recognized by courts as something that they can adjudicate. So we put this in, and this lawsuit, and many of these lawsuits, first and foremost, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. For those of you who don't know what this is, it's really the key piece of federal legislation, federal law that confronts and prohibits discrimination on campus. And without going even further into the weeds with it, basically what it says is that's relevant here is that Jews and Israelis cannot be discriminated against in any institution that receives federal funding. That means every public university and almost every private university in this country. They cannot permit discrimination, which means, going back to the examples I gave before, treating Jewish students or denying Jewish or Israeli students the same rights, the same application of school policies, the same protections that are available to all other students, and denying that because these people are Jewish. So this is exactly what we saw here. The student, and this wasn't even being, this anti-Semitic conduct and discrimination was not even being committed by students. This was being committed by the university itself. So, this is not a matter of you haven't intervened enough, you, the university, haven't done enough to deal with students who are harassing somebody or what have you. This is you, the university, the people who are in control. You are actually the ones who are perpetrating this unlawful conduct and denying the student her rights. So that's first. I want to skip a little bit, but basically the others, and this is, again, relevant to almost all these lawsuits, are there are state laws that are quite similar that, for example, specifically prohibit discrimination based on religion in education, whether that means in admissions, housing, again, the opportunities on campus. Can I join this class? You can't deny someone from joining a class because they're Jewish. You cannot grade them down because they are Jewish or Israeli. Things like that. And then the other one that I mentioned, this lawsuit does not include the First Amendment, which I've noted, but I think that's worth mentioning as well because it comes up a lot. Very briefly, First Amendment, among other things, is freedom of speech. What does this mean? Basically, with some exceptions, some qualifications, a university cannot prevent, or public universities at least, cannot prevent students from saying things, from expressing themselves because the university doesn't like what they're saying. Now, the university may be able, well, certainly can jump in and stop students if they are threatening other students, if they are, actually directing intimidating speech towards specific students, things like that. They can certainly say, stop that, we're punishing you, you need to cut it out, etc. But a school cannot say that a Jewish student group cannot form, or a pro-Israel Zionist student group cannot form. They cannot say you cannot hold a rally because we don't like your Zionist message, anything like that. So that comes up quite often. And then, as I also mentioned, breach of contract. Um, when a student goes to a school, and this is pretty universally accepted by courts across the country. Basically, the school's code of conduct, the school's official policies, arguably any advertising that the school presents, what the school has on its website, what it promises students who are going there that it will deliver to them. It's obligated to deliver it to them. It promises that it will do X, Y, and Z. Students come and pay often a tremendous amount of money to attend this school and have access to these resources. The school is obligated to ensure that students can access these resources. So this is quite similar in some ways to Title VI and the other anti-discrimination laws. But this is specifically, I gave you my money based on your promises. You're not giving me your promises. And this can also relate to something like, the school says that it will protect students in various ways, or the school says that students are allowed to put flyers up. Okay, if that's the rule, and then Jewish students' flyers are ripped down, it's reported, the school doesn't do anything about it. The school is not delivering on its guarantee to students that this is related to free speech also, but that you have the right to put up flyers. If someone can just rip them down, that's not any kind of right. And why would the students be paying for this? So there are several others, but things like dealing with emotional distress, that's more of a complex topic that I will skip for now. But that tends to be how these lawsuits work. One more thing I want to say about this is that there are different avenues to approach this. I don't know how familiar any of you are with this, but when I'm talking about Title VI and all these other laws, I'm talking about actually filing a lawsuit. And the reason why that is the Lawfare Project's preferred approach is because it tends to get the most meaningful impact, the types of impact and outcomes, like I mentioned earlier with San Francisco State, that really move the needle, that impact Jewish students and faculty now and into the future, and that can be enforced. It is also possible to file what's called a Title VI complaint with the Department of Education and the federal government, their Office for Civil Rights. I'm not going to say that's never worth doing, but in our view, it's certainly less effective. And if there are grounds to file a lawsuit, generally speaking, that is the way we encourage going. If the goal is not to resolve the problems, but to resolve them in a meaningful, impactful, broad-based way. So, Carnegie Mellon, very quickly, Columbia. Again, these situations, there's going to be common threads because they all involve denying Jewish students their rights because of based on their Judaism or their complaints about anti-Semitism. So, very briefly, this was another situation. This actually materialized after everything started after October 7th. Columbia has been a very problematic university for years, but even more so now, I would say. And a student, Jewish student, her name is Mackenzie Forrest. She had raised complaints to the university about the climate on campus, the very aggressive demonstrations, the fact that there's just anti-Israel flyering and rhetoric everywhere. I mean, not just something that she could turn away from, but coming at her from all angles. The professors are saying terrible things. And she complained about this and requested accommodations. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier. She had asked if she could, for example, take courses, take courses remotely until things calm down. And again, this is something that is offered to students, and she was denied. And then the school, again, took a number of other steps against her, and ultimately forced her out of her academic program. This is quite detailed, so I can go into more if you want. But I mean, this is really sort of the biggest breach or violation of rights and breach of contract. To take steps when someone is being discriminated against, when they are complaining about being discriminated against, to get it so that they can no longer pursue their education. I mean, there's not much that's worse than that. So again, we filed suit. This was just a couple weeks ago. And lawsuits go very slowly generally. So it's not as if you file and there's usually something exciting to report the next day. But what I will tell you is just a few days ago, uh, the yeah, yesterday I believe actually, or the week before, recently, Columbia came out, and I cannot guarantee this was prompted by our lawsuit, although the timing certainly would support that conclusion. One of the big issues on campus that was not relevant or directly relevant to Mackenzie's lawsuit, but is impacting a lot of other Jewish students, Columbia and elsewhere, is that these anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli students are staging these protests all over the place, and they're incredibly disruptive, and they're even doing them in areas, in buildings where classes are held, or in libraries. This is not just we're out in the quad and Jewish students don't are understandably appalled by the messaging, but we can go about our lives and we can go about our learning. This is actually disrupting learning, and that's not okay. That crosses a line. So Columbia has now issued a new policy that prohibits protesting activity in academic spaces. Now, this is something that, when I heard, I thought, I can't believe they don't have that policy already. They've just been allowing anybody to protest. Well, yes, that's why this has been happening, because they did not have a policy like that. So even without getting to the point of a settlement, anywhere near that, even to the point of where Columbia may think, I don't know what they think, but we're not at the point where the case is, very clearly in our favor and in Mackenzie's favor, and Columbia is going to be rushing around, to do anything it can to try to resolve this. I think we'll get to that point, but we're not there yet because it's just filed. They've already issued a new policy, and if they do not enforce that policy, and that is to the of prohibiting protests in academic spaces, and these continue to happen, and Jewish students' learning continues to be disrupted and prevented because of these protests, that may form the basis of a new lawsuit. I don't think the university wants to put itself in that position. I will stop there. I've said quite a bit, hopefully not too much too close together, but if there are questions, I'm happy to answer. If not, I can certainly say more.
Thank you so much, Ben. You said a lot of good substantive things. I think we've all heard of some of these things like Title VI and what's gone on in Columbia. I think you brought it all together very well. I'm just going to go right to the questions. Because they've come now fast and furious. So,
Go right ahead.
All right. In the workplace, management has a legal obligation to take action against the hostile environment, including bullying, insults, verbal assaults, and written threats, even if there's no physical assault. Aren't the educational institutions, the universities, similarly responsible for ensuring a peaceful milieu? And what are the metrics of the legality of that?
Sure, that's a great question. So, yes and no, but mostly yes. First of all, a university is, I've touched on this a few times, but not directly in this context, so I'm so glad you asked. A university is obligated to enforce its policies and to enforce its policies equally. This goes to what I was saying before, that if a university has a rule and it's only being applied to, it's a rule that would benefit all students, and it's only being applied to Arabic or whoever students and benefiting them, and Jewish students are not being able to realize the benefit of this rule because it's not being applied to them in their circumstances, yes, that can be a form of unlawful discrimination. It also, if a school is just not applying its rules at all, and that is having a harmful effect on Jewish students, that is something else that could serve as the basis of a claim, or that could be a breach of contract. Again, these rules are part of the school's promises of the school's contract with students who are paying to be there. So if many schools have rules about bullying, about threats, intimidation, etc. If conduct is going on and it is reported, it needs to be reported. The schools are not, much as I think schools can use the reporting mechanism to sort of turn a blind eye and willfully not know about things that they do have reason to know, you need to report things. So if conduct is happening that clearly falls within what is prohibited, and the school is not doing anything about it, then yes, that can be part of a claim. What I do want to distinguish, though, is, and this is again nuanced, so I don't want to make an overly broad statement. Statements that are highly critical of Israel, or Israeli policies, even statements that are untrue about Israel, even statements that are just, many statements that are disgusting, and whatever words you want to use against Israel. If those are not being targeted towards individual students, or if they are not severe and pervasive, and by that I mean students are walking around and they can't walk a few feet without somebody saying something terrible to them, a Jewish student, about Israel. Your homeland's committing genocide. If that's what they're getting everywhere, then that could rise to the level of the type of harassment or intimidation that school rules prohibit. This depends on the rules at specific schools. I'm speaking to what types of rules we see commonly. If, however, there's a rally, the only thing that's happening on campus, not to diminish this, but there's a big rally of students, and I'm not forgetting, I think this was Northwestern, and SJP there allegedly did something with
they put inserts into the campus paper.
Yeah, well, that was one. They did that. Yeah, that was one of the things. And they just distributed that all over the place. They had a protest at the library. But yeah, let's use the putting these inserts and putting a fake paper out and just distributing it everywhere. I mean, in my view, and some may disagree, that's not. Anybody can file a complaint. And I think a student should file a complaint about that, because it is, I would find that harassing or whatever else. That is the type of thing that I do not think is going to be seen as falling under bullying or intimidation, or that the school has to do anything about. It may be a component of a bigger situation, but it is not something, at least with what we saw, that was targeting Jewish students. Similarly, if we see a big crowd, SJP rallies, a ton of people to march around chanting "From the river to the sea," if those people participating are chanting together in a particular space, they're not, again, going up to Jewish students and yelling in their faces. They're not following Jewish students around. They're not surrounding a Jewish sorority house and chanting this. Then, putting aside free speech rights, then generally, the school, I don't think that alone that they would qualify, and they have to qualify as harassment. The fact that people are hearing things that they don't like and that they find hurtful, offensive, etc., that is not the same as targeted bullying or harassment. Again, however, we have to look at the whole situation. Enough of these individual components could pave the way for a particular claim, even if the school isn't necessarily obligated to respond to any individual one. But there are plenty of circumstances, and I could describe more, where yes, if we had, what was it, Harvard, I think, there was a video of a bunch of students surrounding a Jewish student for no other reason other than he was Jewish, and kind of getting in his face, I think making contact. That's something 100% the school has to do something about. Even if they didn't make contact, that's assault, putting someone in fear of their physical well-being. That could fall under bullying rules. That could fall under harassment, intimidation rules, etc. Yes, the school has to do something about it. And again, this is why it is so important to report these instances, because if you don't report them, you can't. It's not very easy to go and sue the school for not protecting Jewish students. And on top of that, I see all the time students who are not Jewish, I'll say anti-Israel students, filing BS complaints against Jewish students, basically abusing the system. And you know what? Those complaints, generally speaking, the schools will open them, and the schools will call the Jewish student in. And this is, they don't go anywhere if they're not based on anything, or the Jewish student hasn't done anything wrong. But still, the school will follow through on these complaints, and they will generally do so on both sides, whether it's an Arabic student, whether it's a Jewish student, whoever filing these complaints. If they don't, again, that's where you have a discrimination claim. So I realize that was quite a long answer, but the answer is yes, schools do need to enforce their rules, but it's important to understand that not everything that that is offensive, that some might perceive as intimidating, not everything anti-Semitic is going to fall within the rules. In this country, people are allowed to be racist. A lot of people don't know this, but hate speech is legal in this country. Threats are not. Defamation is not. Saying hateful things is legal. And therefore, if you're hearing hateful things being just spoken out into the ether on campus, things like that, I think it's terrible. It may be part of something bigger, but that's not to say a school has to address all these things. Just as if a Jewish student, let's say, I'm not encouraging this, but they've seen situations where Jewish students have said what I think are nasty things to Palestinian students, and similarly, these were not things that the school could respond to under their anti-bullying or whatever policies. So apologies for the long answer. I hope that was a helpful answer, though.
I think it was. Next question. Is there a legal difference in terms of enforcement for colleges that receive federal funding and those that don't?
Yes. So, and keep in mind first that almost every private school receives federal funding. There are, I don't know the number offhand, but there's a few primarily religious Christian schools that have decided, this is fine for schools to decide this, but they don't want to be involved with the government. They don't want, and that can be for positive reasons. This is not necessarily, and I don't think it is, to avoid oversight or enforcement of Title VI and others. But that's a very small handful. Almost every private school, for example, participates in federal student loan programs, which means they fall under the auspices of Title VI, and all private schools do, public schools do as well. So yes, that is the answer. If a school receives no federal funding, then no, it's beyond Title VI. If we look at the First Amendment, that's not based on federal funding. That's based on, well, the First Amendment, which applies to all public schools. So private schools do not have to follow First Amendment guarantees and ensure free speech in the same way that public schools do. Also in California, there's a state law called the Leonard Law that extends the First Amendment and applies it to private colleges in California. So private and public colleges are viewed the same as far as free speech goes and their obligations to protect it in California. Things like breach of contract, there may be some differences, but that is not generally impacted by federal funding. And other claims like emotional distress, at least I have not seen that be impacted. But unless a student is at one of these very few colleges that gets no federal funding, the same laws are going to apply.
Right. I think the next question should get a brief answer, but maybe I'm wrong. It's a question about Title VI and its applicability to these city council meetings that we're seeing, because I believe Title VI really just refers to the university protections.
No.
Sorry.
Title VI can apply to any institution that receives federal funding. So I don't know enough about all these city councils to know what, if they're getting federal funding, that state laws may apply. I'll say it's possible. Again, not only whether, well, the first question, of course, was raised, does the law apply to these situations at all? Do they meet the criteria, i.e. receiving federal funding? The next question is, okay, well, is the conduct going on such that Title VI would be implicated? And if it's, generally speaking, that means, is it beyond, some people are expressing anti-Israel views, some people are not. Or there's general hostility. That generally is not going to be enough. But it's, I would look at the situation and give you a better, more specific answer under the circumstances.
I appreciate that important note, because we often hear about it in the university context, but have you come across other examples that are prominent or not so much non-university where Title VI is applied?
Mm-hmm. More and more lately, seeing a number, this is sort of related to universities, but hospitals that some university hospitals, but other hospitals that receive federal funding. I've been very surprised by how much, I probably shouldn't be surprised by how much anti-Semitism and at times unlawful discrimination I'm seeing in the medical community. So yes, but there are any number of other institutions, organizations, et cetera, out there that somehow receive some federal funding. So yes, Title VI applies.
And the scope of the Lawfare Project in your work, how far, to what extent does that go outside of the campus?
Oh, campus. I mean, listen, we're mostly dealing with campus because that is a major threat, and it's a major threat that we can do something about. But we have had many, many cases involving employment discrimination. These have not involved Title VI, just because these defendants, companies that don't necessarily receive federal funding. In the cases that come to us, we have picked cases that have first of all, that have strong claims, where the issues are systemic, not one-offs, and where a large number of people are affected, and a successful case, against a big company, for example, really sets a meaningful deterrent effect. That's not to say that we think anti-Semitism anywhere is okay, but if it's a confined situation, if it's not affecting a lot of Jewish people, if a successful case is not really, again, likely to move the needle forward, it's probably not a case we're going to take on just because resources are not limitless. I wish they were. I wish we could do all of these, but we have to prioritize the cases that we think are going to have the broadest based impact. But so yes, we deal with, we've had any number of cases, and we have several going on now in the United States and abroad, actually, in Europe, concerning employment discrimination, retaliation for employees reporting issues of anti-Semitism. As I said, we haven't fortunately seen much of this these days, but we had a major case a couple of years ago against the National Lawyers Guild. For those of you not familiar, it's a nonprofit that claims to be about civil rights, but really seems to be overwhelmingly focused on bashing Israel and promoting the BDS movement campaign, which does nothing other than foment anti-Semitism here. It certainly is not having any identifiable effect on Palestinians or Israelis overseas. I digress, though. So we had a major case there that was brought under a number of different causes of action, as I was talking about earlier, how a legal complaint works. But notably, New York State has a law that specifically says you cannot, it is unlawful to boycott, blacklist, refuse to deal, et cetera, basically in commercial relations, buying from people, bidding on contracts, selling. It is unlawful to refuse to do business based on, among many other protected classes, the national origin or religion of the other party. So that means I can't say I'm not gonna sell my whatever to you, or I'm not going to contract with you or hire you to build my roof because you're Israeli. That would violate the law. And that's exactly what happened in this case. That was a big blow to the National Lawyers Guild because they are such adamant proponents of BDS. Well, this case, through what we achieved via settlement, showed that if they want to keep promoting it, they can, promoting BDS. But what they are promoting, they have acknowledged violates the law if anybody does it. So, go out and rob a bank. Okay, who's going to do that? They're going to get arrested. Some other areas we have, I think I mentioned briefly earlier, we've had a number of situations involving victims of hate crimes. That the representation we provide is somewhat different because that's a crime. That's something that is prosecuted by the district attorney, let's say, or federally the Department of Justice. So that's not a matter where we can bring a criminal case to court, as can happen in many countries in Europe, for instance. But we have helped these individuals in a number of ways, helping them with just the preliminary steps. How do I report this to the police? How do we check in with the district attorney to make sure this is going forward? In instances where we have found or learned that the district attorneys were not necessarily pursuing things as hate crimes charges when they should have. We have a full-time press, PR, and social media teams. We have activated them and got one of these situations on the front page of the New York Post and other places, putting pressure on the district attorney to prosecute this as a hate crime, and ultimately they did. Another situation more recently involving a very clearly anti-Semitic violent attack in New York City. We again came to our attention that the current district attorney was not planning to pursue this very vigorously. And we knew who the attacker had been identified. It had been involved in many other situations. And this is a very, very bad actor. And there was no excuse for not pursuing this person to the fullest extent allowed by law. So we worked with the Department of Justice, the federal government, and ultimately got them. They did this themselves. We cannot force anybody, but they filed federal hate crimes charges against the attacker, and that person is now serving a federal prison sentence. So again, there's some other areas, but I think that gives sort of that's sort of the broad overview of what we do. I just want to add to that, though, in all these situations, much as lawsuits litigation can be a goal and often is at times and often is necessary, it's never it's very rarely the first goal. many situations come to us, for example, that are bad, involve anti-Semitism, but do not, are the facts do not meet the level of what would support a good lawsuit. And we're not about to start pursuing bad lawsuits because that's not going to benefit anybody. It's certainly not a good use of time. So in these situations, with students, we will work with the students to help them figure out how to file a complaint within the school. As I keep saying, that's often a first step. We have, worked with them to otherwise ensure that the school addresses the situation. Just recently, we were assisting a student, very outspoken Zionist Jewish student at a school in Louisiana. And first, what happened was some other students posted some nasty photos of him. I mean, he was just out in public, but posted some nasty photos of him and stay away from the Zionists, something like that. That I don't think that's good, but that in of itself was probably not going to pave the way for much. But then people started harassing this man, and a student went up to him, approached him in the gym out of nowhere and dumped water on him. That's making physical contact. That's assault. The student knew that he should go and file a complaint with the police, which he did, and also file a complaint with the school. But the school was dragging its feet and not doing anything and talking about, we're bringing in an outside firm to investigate this, blah, blah, blah. We extensively counseled the student and worked with him and actually attended the online hearing or online meetings about this. And I don't remember I'm now forgetting exactly what happened, but basically the person who assaulted him is pending appeal or something, is kicked out of school until I think next semester. So, even if there's not a lawsuit, if there is something that we can do that will help a real, a major problem, or if what we can do will help pave the way to a lawsuit, if the school doesn't meet its obligations, then we help in all those ways.
Right. We are a minute over, but I think we should have 5-10 minutes before we end because this is such an important issue and we have a lot of parents on the line.
Fine with me.
Okay, I was just going to ask. Thank you so much. But I did want to redirect. A couple of questions are about how do we as parents help students prepare for college and issues about selecting the right college. So I want to end on that, but before I get to that, there's a couple of other questions I wanted to get to, and then let me know if these are too robust and maybe you can give like an abbreviated. But
sure, I'll try.
I know
brevity is not my forte, as you can see.
None of this is like brief or can be, it's all very, involved. But one
Sure.
question is the Office of Civil Rights. So that is the office, the entity within the Department of Ed that's been launching these Title VI investigations, right, on campus.
So they haven't been, I wouldn't say they've been launching them. I would say that they have been recently, complaints have been filed. They finally moved and initiated them. I applaud them for that. I will say, I had mentioned earlier that I don't think Title VI Office for Civil Rights complaints are the way to go. We filed a complaint against Columbia University back in 2019, right after the former administration passed the executive order on combating anti-Semitism, like within days of that. And this was a pretty egregious situation then at Columbia. Only a couple months ago did Columbia announce that it had formally opened, was investigating our complaint. The students, they're still going to do this, but the students are gone at that point. Right. I mean, it's truly absurd. And let's think about what maybe could have been avoided at Columbia. Perhaps they wouldn't be facing our lawsuit right now if Columbia had pulled itself together, but also if the Department of Ed had actually gotten on this a bit faster.
So it's a two-pronged question from that, because that was sort of the origin question, but it's both, can we expect any foot dragging going forward in the maybe near or medium term future from this office? Can they even do that, or are they doing what the bare minimum? And I guess the second part of that question is, the difference between the administration and the students. Like as you just alluded to, the students, what do they care, right? Like, of course they might get sanctioned by the administration, but ultimately Title VI is not necessarily forcing them to change their ways or even cosmetically to change their language. Is that fair to say?
Sure. So I'm sorry, as far as the first question goes about, or going back to the Office for Civil Rights, I wish I could answer that. I don't have, a view into the office. I cannot say that they are dragging their feet. I simply just don't know. I know that ours took, and I know other complaints have taken, and what I think is an unreasonably long amount of time without justification for how long they've taken. But by no means would I say that is an indicator that the office doesn't care, that it's going to drag its feet in general. I think for other reasons that I've sort of alluded to, that generally speaking, it's just not an effective route. And in part because we don't know if they're going to drag their feet. We can't compel them to do something. We can't compel the office to, even if it does conduct an investigation, and if there's a settlement reached or something, we can't compel them to enforce that and ensure that the bad conduct stops. Whereas a lawsuit, you can do that. So I'll leave that there. And then as far as administration versus students, so it's a great question also. I mean, yes, Title VI in particular, it's if you're filing a Title VI lawsuit against the school, it is against the school. It's not against, and the same with the Title VI OCR complaint. And none of these are against the students. If you are successful, though, and what the basis for these suits often is that the school is not doing enough, not to necessarily change the minds or the wrongheadedness of some of its students or force them to not be anti-Semitic. I mean, that's not something we can do. Certainly think education efforts could be better, but that's another issue. But it's that they need to take steps to ensure that Jewish students are not discriminated against, and that could include this severe and pervasive hostile environment. So even if it's at a school where the administration cannot stop students from saying from the river to the sea, if that's so pervasive and severe that it's having this harmful discriminatory impact on Jewish students, then the university better figure out something else. Whether it's instituting mandatory anti-Semitism classes, whether it's offering resources to Jewish students. Who knows? Not who knows. I mean, this is what we look at when we're settling a suit. What do we think? What do the students tell us, and what do we think would be effective to deal with this when we know we can't just wipe out anti-Semitism from campuses? So, yeah, I mean, and frankly, again, racism is not illegal. Hate is not illegal. I hate to say this, but I don't think we're going to rid the world of either of those things anytime soon, nor at campuses. But the point is, campuses need to protect their students, and that's what the law accomplishes. That being said, there also may be instances where it is possible to sue a student directly. For example, if someone assaults somebody else, this is a tort claim, a civil wrong. You could sue a student for assault. And no, you're probably not going to get some windfall monetary award, but that's not the goal here. And I think something like that, if you can identify the student, and if the victim wants to proceed with a lawsuit, that's something where that could, I can't promise this, but that could serve a major deterrent impact. If you then start having articles about so and so was sued because they hit a Jewish student, I wouldn't want that online for everybody to see when I'm looking at getting jobs. And I will just say on that, this is a bit different, but one other example, together with what's called the End Jew Hatred movement. If any of you aren't familiar with that, I highly recommend you look into it. There was a student shortly after October 7th, I believe she was the head of student government at New York University Law School, one of the most elite law schools in the country, who put out this appalling pro-Hamas statement. And people, I'm sure others, but people with End Jew hatred found out pretty quickly, oh, she worked at Winston and Strawn, big major law firm that actually was our co-counsel in the lawsuit against San Francisco State. She worked with them last summer. Wonder if that's where she's planning on going after school. Within hours, Winston and Strawn had announced online that they had rescinded her offer. This is how you behave. You're supporting a terrorist group and basically applauding murder of Jews. There goes your starting $210,000 salary.
Right. There are some more specific questions, one of which I've already sent your email address. Like Washington,
sure.
District in Washington, they have a specific question. And there's a.
Let me just say on that note, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but to whoever emails me, please do. I will say, as you might guess, since October 7th, we are getting hammered with requests for help. That means we may not respond immediately. There are some inquiries where we just cannot respond. We will do our best. We respond to the majority. So please be patient with us. Anyway, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate that disclaimer. I can imagine. And I did want to end on a couple of questions we've had. I'm just going to combine them. And I think I just alluded to them earlier about, and this is very general, but it's, preparing high schoolers for college. And, what are some tips that you have? I mean, because sure they could Google these things, but obviously I would assume, not to answer it myself, but lawfareproject.org And the other question is, are there colleges that are safer for Jewish kids? And would you even go out on a limb and answer that question at this point? Because it's kind of like we have to stand there and fight at the same time with the colleges that aren't.
Right.
You can understand the question.
Yeah, no, I completely, I get asked that a lot. And I think it's one of the most important questions a parent can ask. So a few thoughts. First of all, what is the worst college right now? I mean, there's any number of ways one could evaluate that. The ones that were suing, they are engaged in unlawful anti-Semitism. That doesn't, what is unlawful doesn't necessarily mean what would be worse, the worst thing for individual people, though. There are some schools where the anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish activism is much more prevalent than others, but it may not rise to the illegal level. In which case, what's worse? I guess, is it worse that this is going on everywhere and the school isn't responding because they don't have to, but they're not violating the law or their obligations by not responding? Or is it worse where there's less of this kind of behavior, but the school has retaliated against Jewish students for filing proper complaints about anti-Semitism? That's up to everybody to make their individual decision. What I would say is, do research, look online, but don't base your decisions on what news articles say, because I find, this is not to disparage any of the media, but often it's not the whole story. Or I've talked to so many students at schools where I've just read an article about how terrible it is, and he'll quote one student, and I'll hear, well, I have a ton of Jewish friends, and it's unpleasant, but we love it here. We wish it were different, but I actually heard that about my alma mater, University of Michigan. There was a bunch of really crazy things that happened. A band of students who stormed a faculty administrator building, and that's terrible. Yes, that sounds very scary, and that can be scary. But I'm talking to the Jewish students; they love it there. That situation was dealt with, I don't think, as well as possible. But the fact that happened doesn't mean it's the worst school and anything is going to happen to your kid. I would say, to the extent possible, try to get in touch with not necessarily the Jewish organizations in the schools like Hillel or Chabad. I mean, you could, but I think it's getting in touch with Jewish students, who are students there around when your kid is going to go to the school. There's any number of ways to do that, whether it's personal connections, on and so forth. I think that's probably the best way. Then you'll hear directly from the people who are there. And also, this enables you and your kids think about, who am I hearing this from? Is this somebody who has the same, is like me, in the sense of, what kind of behaviors upset them or don't upset them? What do they find to be intimidating or not intimidating? And again, I'm not telling anybody how to feel, but is this somebody who, if there is a march through campus where people are saying from the river to the sea, where they're going to think, I am about to be attacked, I need to go hide in my dorm room? Again, it is possible that violence will happen, but that's how that impacts some people. Others may say, to hell with you people. Others may feel that this is really unpleasant, but they don't feel physically unsafe. It's about how who are your kids? How do they feel? And talking to people who can give them meaningful advice, basically. Also, I will just another sort of call out. There's an excellent organization, AMCHA, AMCHA initiative, run by a woman named Tammy Benjamin, who has an incredible amount of information on incidents at schools. She's done reports about the correlations between support for BDS on campus and anti-Semitic incidents, things like that, and more. I think she's a great resource, but really talking to Jewish students who are at the schools is absolutely your best bet.
Right. On that note,
and prepare your students. Sorry, one more thing. Just yes, two more things. Yes, let your students know about the Lawfare Project. This is not a plug. I mean, this is why we exist. And if students don't know that someone's out there to help them enforce their rights when they're being violated, or even to understand their rights and sort of have their eye out for red flags, they're not going to be very well positioned to deal with these issues if and when they come up. On top of that, you can tell them this, although I'll tell them, I've said it too many times already, but figure out, if you're a student at a school and you're experiencing anti-Semitism, learn the school rules to an extent. This is something we can help with. We're actually working with a number of law firms to create a user-friendly resource about this. Most importantly, though, on this front, figure out where the proper office is in the school, whether it's DEI, Title IX, whatever else, to file discrimination complaints. And if things happen, file them. If you want to consult with us or somebody else about whether we think you should file them, we are here for that. But I see too many Jewish students, and this is heartbreaking, who think that, if I file a complaint, I'm going to make the situation worse. Or if I file a complaint, then or I participate in a lawsuit, that's somehow going to reflect poorly on me and harm me in my employment. Can I say that's impossible? No. But have I ever seen any indication that that does happen? No. So it is about empowering your students that they have rights. They deserve to have them enforced just like everybody else. There is no reason why people should feel comfortable running around chanting "From the river to the sea," and Jewish students should not feel comfortable minimally just being Jews on campus, maximally being proudly Zionist on campus. That is what you need to tell your kids.
I appreciate that note, because every so often we get that concern that we don't want to make it worse, and every situation is different, but that's inspiring.
Right.
So Ben, thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry for those who had other questions we couldn't get to, but your email address is ben@thelawfareproject.org, correct?
Yes.
You should definitely look into the Lawfare Project. You also mentioned AMCHA, AMCHA, I believe.
Yes.
And also End Jew Hatred. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Israel on Campus Coalition. On that note, also, there are just so many excellent Jewish organizations that have boots on the ground. End Jew Hatred has boots on the ground at campuses and campus fellows. Israel on Campus Coalition is an amazing group. Do some research on what Jewish Zionist organizations are out there that operate on campuses, and tell your students to get involved, your kids to get involved. Or fraternities and sororities. I was in a fraternity. I loved it. Again, I wasn't dealing with these issues. That would have been the support I needed, I think. Whatever it may be out there, just identify what is best for you.
Thank you. So for all the work that you do and the Lawfare Project does, we really thank you deeply. And I know it's you have to be tireless to do it. So we at clubs, know that. So it really is the frontline battle, our youth. And
yeah, agreed.
So yeah, we thank you, and I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We hope you can all join us for our next Eye on Zion webinar, which will be Wednesday, March 27th. Dr. Brandy Shufutinsky will join us to discuss how the left fuels anti-Semitism. So yeah, you know Brandy, I'm sure. Lastly, I do want to as a reminder to let everyone know that this webinar series would not be possible without the support of our generous donors. And so if you would like to experience more of this type of programming, please consider supporting us at clubz.org. So again, Ben, thank you. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.